The decade of the 80s were incredible for slacks on the sidelines.
Stabby Ivy. Stabby Ivy.
Think about it. They all had the slacks and sweaters. Think of the sweaters that they rolled out for big games. The haberdashery was to be contended with.
Getting 7 points here.
All 6 of you worked your tail off.
5 seconds left. 4, you dreaming? 3,
Number 3. 72, pushing 2 weeks.
4.
You have a top 10 for Coach of the 80s. Why?
Who doesn't love debating NFL topics of the 80s? Today, we discuss the Sultans of the sidelines.
Great coaches of the 80s.
When you think of the great clips of 80s coaches, Sam Rutigliano with his hands on his knees, bent over.
One time, baby.
One time.
Personally, I love the coaches of the 80s fashion sense.
I really like the hats of the 80s because I like the mesh.
And those nylon coats.
I mean, I remember the cowboy boots from Jerry, and he wore black.
Black is not a color. Black's an attitude.
Mike Ditka, he had like a curly hair perm thing going with the mustache.
Take a look. Doesn't that look good? Yeah. Damn, that's what this game's all about.
The coaches on our list are defined by more than their unbridled fashion.
I think Super Bowl rings count a lot.
Winning championships can't hurt, but this list isn't just about Super Bowls.
3 Super Bowl victories.
It's about coaching characters who captured the spirit of the 80s.
Those coaches made the most headlines. There's no question about that.
Gilbride and Buddy Ryan and the Oilers.
Has Buddy Ryan taken a swing at Kevin Gilbride?
I think that was the 90s.
Number 10 coach of the 80s, Jerry Glanville.
Number 10.
Jerry Glanville is on the list. He wasn't a coach, he was a clown show.
How do I look? This is the NFL, which stands for not for long when you make them calls. I'll be selling groceries.
Jerry Glanville was unbelievably hyped in the 80s.
Damn almighty!
You wear some black garb, you wear some black shoes, and I think women dig black.
I have a problem with Jerry Glanville being on this list, even at number 10.
Jerry Glanville makes our list because he was the Robin Williams of the NFL.
Maybe if I wear black, I ride a motorcycle, and I leave tickets for Elvis, it'll kind of obscure that I'm kind of a mediocre coach.
We never left a ticket for Elvis in any game I ever coached. He's driving to a race. But James Dean was Mr. Cool. Here's the ticket, James Dean. So we left tickets for him.
Okay, we'll make sure he gets it. Thank you very much. Good luck today.
Was he a Bula official? Would you bring him over to me, please? I never took myself too seriously. I took my job real seriously.
The funniest man in football, Glanville was also a good coach. He turned the Oilers into a playoff team.
If Jerry Glanville didn't have such a big ego, he would have been recognized for being a really, really good coach.
He had some stuff that was kind of screwy with the tickets and all that kind of stuff. But what he did do is he got his team to play hard, and he got them to believe in themselves. And I think that's what a coach has to do.
Way to play, D. Great job, D. Great job over here, D.
He motivated you, and he looked at you, and he talked to you, and he hugged you, and he did everything that I loved about a coach.
The only reason I can see Jerry Glanville on that list at all is because his ideas of coaching was legitimate. Those were teams that you had to reckon with.
Great job, Al.
He gave the nickname of the Astrodome. He called it the House of Pain.
Well, the House of Pain was the real deal. They were going to get after you. They were going to hit you.
He coached that hit-you-late football and tried to make the defenses more than just something that could stop you. They would stop you and make you feel the hurt after the fact.
They took great pride in out-hitting you and getting after you and playing the game as it was supposed to be played.
As a result of his pain, some coaches didn't like playing the Oilers. Others just didn't like Glanville.
Guys like Chuck Noll couldn't stand him.
The Steelers would come in and maul the Oilers. And then when we turn that around and we're mauling them, they don't like you much.
We were down in the Houston Astrodome covering a Steelers-Oilers game, and a lot of the Oilers were spearing the Steelers, and Chuck was upset about that. So Glanville comes running over to the sideline to shake Chuck's hand, and Chuck wouldn't let it go.
And Glanville's trying to pull his hand away.
And he starts pointing in his face. I forget the exact words, but it was,
said, wait till you come to Pittsburgh.
Just know that. I'm serious.
Well, we did come back. And the worst beating we ever gave him was after that handshake.
Glanville had more feuds than Richard Dawson, but only one takes the cake when you're talking about our number 10 coach of the 80s.
I'm guessing Sam Weich was not one of the coaches that talked to you about Jerry, because you remember they were famously feuding.
Really, I mean, you can only be so stupid, but they have exceeded the limits here somehow.
If you criticize me, I then go evaluate the criticizer. I knew Sam a long, long time.
Glanville and Weich brought out the best and the worst of each other.
I don't think any less of Sam now than I ever did.
Together, they were an enormously entertaining combination.
Like it or not, Jerry Glanville made our list at number 10.
Overall, I'm more than honored that they put me in there. I think the next time I see you, I'll be buying drinks.
Coming up, Glanville made it, but what about his arch rival?
He wanted to push that envelope and push that envelope. He ripped the envelope.
Does Sam Weich have a place on our countdown?
Kick their butts all over the field.
We all love that great taste of food hot off the grill.
Chuck Noll belongs on this list.
During the 1970s, Chuck Noll won 4 championships while establishing one of the greatest dynasties in NFL history.
As the Steelers stand atop the pro football world tonight.
He does win his final Super Bowl in January 1980. Noll belongs on this list, at least at the very bottom.
At that point, it was kind of over.
Noll missed the cut because in the 80s, his Super Steelers weren't so super.
Shoe was coming off, up the line script, we were hard to take time out.
He won fewer playoff games than the Vikings' Jerry Burns and never made it back to the Super Bowl like our next coach.
The number 9 coach of the 80s, Sam Weich.
One more game and we finish it out.
Thought he was a good coach.
Sam Weich was ahead of his time.
He never won anything.
His only fault was going against Joe Montana. You know, they'd have at least a Super Bowl.
Montana's going to go back and throw.
Super Bowl 23 was a close encounter of the first kind, but the Bengals lost.
34 seconds away.
Yet Sam Weich is still number 9.
This is what it comes down to.
His Bengals won 2 divisional crowns and won 3 playoff games.
The Bengals of that era in the late 80s,
Fake Blazer, box 2.
they were playing chess, and the rest of the league was playing checkers.
First nickel, 3rd and 5.
We got the JB flat.
Sam was on the cutting edge in terms of football genius. There's no question about it.
Attack, 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 attack.
He would do things that forced the competition committee to rethink the rules.
Let's go, attack, attack, set alert, set alert.
Obviously, the no huddle. He had the sugar huddle, which is, a huddle like 5 yards from the line of scrimmage rather than the conventional huddle.
The no huddle, the refs really did what they could to give the defense a chance.
Check 61.
Because Sam wanted it up-tempo, faster all the time.
Hurry up, move.
And Boomer could handle all the calls at the line.
If you didn't have a quarterback who understood what Sam was trying to get done,
Denver Tom.
we could have never ran it.
Bubble draw.
We had to go through these whole gyrations. Then we finally cut it down to its really simplest form, and that's when we were at our most effective.
Marv Levy tried to get the NFL to outlaw it before the AFC Championship game.
You better be on, baby.
I mean, it was down to the day before the game whether the Bengals could use their no huddle or not.
Drove Marv Levy crazy. But thanks to Sam Weich, Marv Levy says, you know what? If you can't beat him, join him. And he comes up with the no huddle attack that was Buffalo's ride to those Super Bowls.
Weich's teams were winners, but our number 9 coach made just as many headlines off the field as he did on it.
Careful what you say to the media. Don't have any comments that you make now that you'll regret later.
In Cincinnati, it was constant firestorms.
I don't want to hear any of you guys ever talk about our fourth quarter play again.
People in Cleveland, I don't think they liked him at all.
Well, the next person that sees anybody throw anything onto this field, point them out, or get them out of here. You don't live in Cleveland.
But people in Cleveland hated me more.
Weich and Glanville had a lot in common. Despite their ongoing feud, both made enemies and both made our countdown. Chalk this round up to Weich, who comes in a notch higher at number 9.
He was always on the cutting edge of things that were tough to defend.
I'm just fighting my ass off here.
Sam had a good football mind. And a good mind like that, it's a shame it was wasted.
The number 8 coach of the 80s, Tom Landry.
That hat and that suit, that's what I'll remember about Tom Landry.
I love the fedora. The fedora sticks with Tom Landry. It's the coolest thing ever.
Put a hat on it. That would have been his motto.
Duh, the fedora. Enough of the fedora. The fedora in the shadows. The fedora on the sideline. Enough already with the fedora.
Was there ever a funnier guy than Landry? I mean, that guy was just cutting it up all the time. Hilarious.
No one has penetrated the gunfighter stare, the grim face that makes him look like a regional director of the FBI. Or a brooding Hamlet.
I hated Tom Landry. I hated his hat. I hated how nifty he was.
No one on our countdown is connected with a team and a city more than Tom Landry.
He was the Dallas Cowboys. He was the franchise. He was the one and only.
The man famous for a fedora wore many hats for the Cowboys. Landry oversaw both the defense and the offense.
Coached every single aspect of every single game.
Start where you're going to end up on a double shift, see? That way you can look at your situation before you shift the first time, see?
Nobody coaches like that. I mean, your assistants are allowed to say something.
By the beginning of the 80s, our number 8 coach had won 2 Super Bowls and was more popular in Dallas than J.R. Ewing.
Landry, still calm, still collected. We'll put on another ring.
Tom Landry is getting carryover effect. The 70s were so good to Landry that they bled into the 80s for him on this list. I think it's way too high for him.
You could make an argument that Landry doesn't belong on the 80s list because that was when things started to get sideways.
So why is Landry number 8 on our list? Despite peaking during the 1970s, in the 80s he won over 80 games, led his team to 5 playoff appearances, and guided the Cowboys to an NFL record 20th consecutive winning season in 1985.
49 seconds still. Danny White dropping back. And throws to Drew Pearson. Touchdown.
What it's all about.
You have to realize that while he wins his Super Bowls in the 70s, they go to 3 straight NFC Championship games with him in the 80s.
You can't lose them if you don't get there. That's right. They've been one of the outstanding teams.
85 NFC East champs with a team that was really patchwork, and 6-2 in 86 before Danny White got hurt.
We put Jerry Glanville on this list.
That's the stupidest thing I've seen.
Yeah, I think that Tom Landry belongs on the list. Those won't be remembered as the glory years of Tom Landry, but as long as it's Tom Landry, they have to be noted.
Tom Landry is one of the greatest coaches of all time. So whether it's the 70s carrying over into the 80s, I think you can't talk about the 70s or the 80s and the Dallas Cowboys without talking about Tom Landry.
Up next,
he's one of the coaches of the century.
Which coach known for just missing the Super Bowl didn't miss landing on our list?
He turned that whole organization around.
In the 80s, Chuck Knox turned the fledgling Seahawks into playoff contenders.
Whoa. Chuck Knox didn't make the list?
Only 2 coaches won more games during the decade than Chuck Knox, but he gets lost because he coached in the small markets of Buffalo and Seattle.
On behalf of Air Coryell, welcome to San Diego.
In the early 80s, nothing charged up San Diego like Don Coryell's offense.
It's absurd that you don't have Don Coryell as one of the coaches of the 80s. He's one of the coaches of the century.
What's absurd is CBS canceling San Diego's own Simon & Simon. Before that, Air Coryell logged more miles than Airwolf and scored faster than Magic's Showtime Lakers.
Goes into the end zone. Touchdown, Kellen Winslow.
Coryell misses our list because he flamed out after his 3rd losing season of the decade in 1986. About the same time our next coach began to peak.
7 coach of the 80s, Marty Schottenheimer.
There's a gleam, men.
There's a gleam, man.
I see a gleam.
There's a gleam.
You gotta have a gleam.
Let's get the gleam. All right, let's go.
How do you get the gleam? What is the gleam? The gleam coming off the helmet? I got to get that. I got to grab that.
It's the gleam off the Lombardi Trophy. When a team gets handed that Lombardi Trophy, I always look for that gleam of the lights that are going off the thing. I know exactly what he's talking about.
The problem was the Gleam speech apparently never came out in the playoffs.
Number 7. Top coaches of the 80s. Marty's at 7. Nah, that's about right.
Marty Schottenheimer won in Cleveland. If you can win in Cleveland, you get double credit. A win in Cleveland equals 2 wins anywhere else.
The reason he also belongs on the list is the glasses. I mean, the Coke bottle glasses are absolutely amazing.
Marty Schottenheimer with those 2 big bay windows on his face.
You got to give Schottenheimer credit because these glasses would be totally cool in hip-hop today.
Marty Schottenheimer is one of the best coaches in the NFL to never get recognition.
If we run the strong box.
With his head-to-head, highly animated, hands-on approach, Marty Schottenheimer is a born teacher.
In the mid-'80s, Marty Schottenheimer introduced the Browns to a bold and brash brand of football. And over the next few years, Marty Ball became the heart of rock and roll in Cleveland.
Has a man open, Weathers, 30, 25, 20, take that blitz and stick it up your Jerry Glanville.
Marty taught you football every day, at every position. I mean, he was a very, very good football coach.
You're involved in cloud support. You still must read before you support.
He's the one guy that can get the hair on the back of your neck to stand up.
Right now it's time to take a step forward. We've been here before. You remember?
You hear Marty Ball and you think they're going to be good offensively, they're going to get really close, and then if you're a fan, they're going to screw you. They're going to really hurt your feelings.
Touchdown! 98.5-yard drive.
That guy had the worst luck. I would never walk into a casino with him.
Whatever can go wrong will go wrong and has gone wrong.
Marty Schottenheimer never won anything.
He took the Browns to 4 playoff appearances, won 3 division titles.
And the Browns have done it again. They are the AFC Central Division champions.
If your goal was to win a division, win no playoff games, Marty's your guy.
How much of that blame, if that's the word, would you lay at his feet?
I would say you have to blame him for quite a bit of that.
I'm not sure they were better than the teams they lost to. You know, the Ernest Biner play in Denver, is that the coach's fault?
Be no consoling Ernest Biner right now.
I mean, this is Marty Schottenheimer's karma, and you can't ignore it.
Cleveland was down in the dumps. Cleveland hadn't won in years.
I'll tell you, our tight ends are screwing everything up right now.
He turned that whole organization around.
Schottenheimer earns a spot at number 7 for leading the Browns to 4 consecutive playoff appearances for the first time since 1954, 4 years before the birth of the King of Pop.
And the Browns will play for the AFC Championship, folks.
Marty Schottenheimer gets a lot of credit for bringing the Browns to great heights, even though not as great as they wanted.
I think Marty Schottenheimer is one of the best coaches in that decade. Unfortunately, he didn't have a team good enough to go that far.
The number 6 coach of the 80s, Dan Reeves.
I think that Dan Reeves is somewhat underrated. You think of those teams that he had in Denver in the 80s. I mean, those were really good teams, and they played an exciting brand of football.
The Broncos have won the AFC Championship for the 4th time.
As the Broncos approached the playing fields of the NFL in 1981, they searched for a new direction. New owner Edgar F. Kaiser Jr. hired Dan Reeves from Dallas as head coach.
Dan Reeves looked like a professor on the sideline. To me, he just looked like that teacher that you never wanted to have in school because he wouldn't let you get away with anything.
I love the old school attire. I so long for the days when coaches could wear the jacket and tie and that look. And he was like the last of the coaches that really had that sideline look, that apparel.
I think it's amazing. I think it's Dan Reeves caught in between eras. he is a product of the 60s and 70s when he wore a suit to the sideline, like Tom Landry. And then he's getting into the 80s where it's getting a little bit more loosey-goosey, but he still can't go all the way. So he's got to have the suit jacket, but also the sweater underneath. Now that's classy.
Okay, men, games like this won by great plays, by great individuals. We got a bunch of them on this team. Let's make sure we're going hard to get them, all right? Let's get at it.
In the early 80s, Dan Reeves transformed the defensive-minded Broncos into an offensive juggernaut. Reeves' new wave approach carried Denver to the top of the AFC as Sundays became fast times at Mile High.
Sewell in motion, pitch winder, reverse to Sewell, pitch back to Elway on the flea flicker. Long throw for Vance Johnson at the goal line, leaping catch, touchdown, what a play!
Reeves finished with 91 wins in the decade, and he is the only coach on our countdown to lead his team to 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. So why does he get stuck at number 6?
Look, Reeves deserves credit for getting to 3 Super Bowls with the Broncos, but they get annihilated in every one of those games. They're never in those games. They lose 39-20 to the Giants, and that's the closest Super Bowl they had under Reeves. They give up 35 straight points in the second quarter to the Redskins in '87.
Touchdown, Washington Redskins!
In '89, 55-10. There's something there for Reeves that you have to criticize.
If you look at his record, look at the number of games that he won, how consistently he won. He's won a lot of big games and taken a lot of, I think, fairly average teams great distances. And I think he belongs higher in the minds of most football fans among the really good coaches in the modern era. He's the only person that I know that Bill Parcells called coach.
Coming up, which coach gets all the respect and a spot in our top 5?
Get it in, good job. Touchdown, Phillip Rivers, called his own number.
This list is flying like Ben Johnson in Seoul. But before we continue, let's take a moment to catch our breath.
Number 10.
Damn almighty!
The Man in Black, Jerry Glanville.
I think women dig black.
Number 9.
Careful what you say to the media.
Sam Weiss is never at a loss for words.
Cincinnati, constant firestorms.
Number 8. Tom Landry, a coach for any decade.
As long as it's Tom Landry, they have to be noted.
Number 7.
There's a gleam!
Marty Ball can't get the gleam in Cleveland.
The Gleam speech apparently never came out in the playoffs.
Number 6. A mile high isn't high enough for Dan Reeves.
I just didn't understand what would go wrong.
And now, the number 5 coach of the 80s, Don Shula.
I think he's a guy that was the best coach of the 70s. I wouldn't call him a coach of the 80s.
He's the all-time winningest coach. Now, I know that happened in the 90s, but a lot of those big wins came in the 80s.
Don Shula coached in 4 decades. In the 80s alone, he won 94 games. From 81 to 85, the Dolphins won more than 76% of their games and captured 4 AFC East championships.
You see that?
He's the dean.
You gotta call it!
Don Shula, to me, was basically Frank Sinatra. Wouldn't he be like the coolest guy to go to a steakhouse with? He's got his own steakhouse. Like, he'd probably be at his own steakhouse at a quarter, smoking a cigar, talking to some beautiful women.
There's so many things about Don Shula that are underappreciated. To me, with Don Shula, it's the little things.
We need a drive on offense. We need a drive. We gotta put it together. We gotta start running with the ball, pass protecting, making plays.
Next time you see a coach waste a timeout or do something that makes you want to pull your hair out, close your eyes and think about how many times you remember Don Shula's teams doing that. Probably 0.
Where's Andrew? The hell in there!
36 years. That's how long our number 5 coach spent at the helm of an NFL team. He coached a perfect season, He has 2 Super Bowl titles and won more games than any coach in NFL history.
Don Shula is one of the most fascinating coaches because of his ability to endure over a long period and not get burned out on the game.
Shula's the example that I always use when I talk about good coaches adopting their philosophy to the talent they have.
He took about 2 steps back toward the ball.
The 1970s Dolphins define an era that is basically dead now. I mean, nobody runs 2/3 to 70% of the time. Don Shula had to go to throwing the ball and eventually realized, okay, I need a magic kind of a passer.
The Dolphins select quarterback Dan Marino of Pittsburgh.
He went from having the most prolific and dominant running game of the 70s to the most prolific and dominating passing game of the 80s.
Marino going deep upfield, touchdown!
Coaching isn't just on Sunday. Coaching is Monday through Saturday.
Everything we do is for a reason.
So is Don Shula one of the great Monday through Saturday coaches of all time? Absolutely.
Mid-season, Earl. Okay, baby.
Is he one of the great Sunday coaches of all time? Absolutely. You put those two things together, we're going to have a team that has a chance to win almost every time it sets foot on the field.
The number 4 coach of the 80s. Hire Mike Ditka.
4.
Coach.
Mike Ditka was a hot mess.
Polish sausage.
He was bigger than life.
Fierce.
He was as Chicago as a deep dish pizza.
Ditka.
He was really perfect for the 80s. Does anything say more 80s than that old school Bears sweater that said Bears on it?
Have you been to an ugly sweater party before? I love ugly sweaters. There is a website, ditkasweatervest.com. I know this because I bought them as Christmas presents for my dad and my brother.
Oh, Greg!
If you were to make a list of all the great names associated with the Chicago Bears, you would start with George Halas. Number 2 on that list, without question, is Mike Ditka.
Man, this is what it's all about. I mean, people are getting snot knocked out of him out there. This is a good football game.
He's got the awesome Chicago accent. He's bold and he's brass and he's got the slick back hair.
You wanted that much? Let's go!
Just his steel jaw, his chomping the hell out of that gum, made people fall in love with him.
What if the Bears, what if they all missed their wake-up call?
You know you've made it when you're a very long-running SNL skit.
How much would you beat Dallas by?
Skits and styles aside, Mike Ditka was an intimidating coach.
I know I'm smarter than that.
He's at number 4 on our list because of swagger, not sweaters.
Ditka used, shall we say, unconventional ways to motivate people.
I don't give a on the shoot, catch the ball.
But it's hard to find a player that didn't say they loved playing for Mike Ditka.
Mike coming in, halfway through my career, changed the team.
All you got to do is want it as much as we know we want it.
That's a guy who had a plan, and you were either on the bus, as he would say, or you were under it.
Yeah, the play he threw to Woody for a touchdown was his own call, was not my call. He just took it on his own.
I'm running this show. You may be the guy who heads up the huddle. I'm the CEO of everything.
Don't change your route. Stay out! Stay out! See that? That's your IQ, buddy. 0.
There were times I worried that he might kill his quarterback.
Get him the out of
The temper and passion had their roots.
No, not G.
Call it the trickle-down Dickonomics.
Be smart. Let's go down. 10 men. Let's go to work.
But there was a beauty to Ditka. He wasn't just a hothead. He was pretty funny.
Let's all try him first down.
At what point of the game, dear?
We were lucky to win it, so I'll take the luck. I'm tired of the skill.
Mikey?
But what Ditka's Bears did on the field was no joking matter. From 83 to 89, he averaged nearly 11 wins a season.
We've earned the right. Now we got to go out and take the right.
And he, of course, led the Bears to the Super Bowl title in 1985.
Just going to beat on you and beat on you and beat on you for 60 minutes, if that's what it took to win.
We got to knock it out of center.
The X's and the O's part of it, that to him wasn't nearly as important as just being tougher than the other guy.
You think this is a damn soap opera, you're full of
We missed Mike Ditka. Where's the characters at? The guys that just had this simple approach to the game, like just go beat the living crap out of that guy. I guess the only indictment on Mike Ditka is those Bear teams should have won more than one Super Bowl. They were just too damn good.
What is next?
Up next.
I get sick of you people.
And it was a dumb play by Anderson.
Which one of these media darlings landed in the top 3?
From a media standpoint, covering that team in the 80s,
I don't really care.
more than pleasurable.
We got a long way to go. We got a lot of work to do. We're close, and close don't mean and you can put that on TV for me.
In the 80s, Jim Mora led the Saints to their first winning season and their first playoff appearance. But for all his great feats, he was known more for sticking his foot in his mouth.
We just got our ass totally kicked. We couldn't do diddly poo offensively.
In the late 80s, everyone knew who the boss was in Philly.
I told you 2 years ago that I'm the coach of the team. I'll decide who plays, when they play, where they play.
Under the command of Buddy Ryan, the Eagles won a lot of fights, but they never won a single playoff game.
Who goes to the penalty box?
Yet neither Mora nor Ryan could match the combination of quotability or success of our next coach.
It's unbelievable. You know, that's why sometimes I call you guys commies. That's why. It's that stuff right there. There it is. Subversive from within, even when it's going good.
The number 3 coach of the 80s, the tune-up, Bill Parcells.
Here comes Harry Carson now. He's looking for the Gatorade.
Is there anything more 80s than Gatorade on Parcells?
Parcells is up there without the headset, and they get it.
I don't think the Gatorade bath really becomes a thing if it's not Bill Parcells starting out by getting the Gatorade bath. You want to dump a Gatorade on that guy when it's cold.
But I'll tell you, he got the big one there. Did he ever?
Parcells was the 80s. He got his chance to coach in the 80s. He dominated the 80s.
In 1983, New York got a new head coach and a new sense of fashion.
That horrific Bill Parcells sweater that he had that was about 2 sizes too small. I don't want to knock the guy because he's a legend.
I love the really shiny windbreaker that said Giants across the back. But most importantly, I love the flowing silver locks. There's not a lot of coaches that would do that. Little Madison Avenue of Bill Parcells back in the 80s. He was feeling it, growing out that hair a little bit. I liked it.
Hi, I'm Bill Parcells, the head coach of the Giants.
Parcells found New York to be a tough fit. After a rough first season, tuna became an endangered species in the Big Apple.
He takes over a football team, goes 3-12-1.
The New York Giants are in the midst of a pathetic season. What about Coach Bill Parcells? Is he secure for next year?
We would have been deprived of meeting Bill Parcells had he gone quietly into that good night of coaching. But before the season in which the Giants revived themselves, he said, screw it. If I'm going to get fired, I'm going to get fired being me.
Oh, I got to start this over.
Okay.
Tell that undisciplined center we got to get his head out of his ass. Let's get this operation moving. Shut up. Time out.
An edgier Parcells took the Giants from less than 0 to head of the class in 3 years. It was the biggest career turnaround this side of Robert Downey Jr. and earned Parcells a spot in our top 3.
Intercepted. There goes Taylor down to the 20. 10. Touchdown.
There's no question he belongs on the list as the greatest coaches of the 80s. He goes to the playoffs in 84, wins a game. Goes to the playoffs in 85, wins a game. Goes to the Super Bowl and wins in 1986.
How does he feel, John? I'll tell you, he feels great. This is as good as it gets.
So when you combine all of that, he deserves to be in the top 5 without question.
Parcells was very good with the X's and O's. I mean, he certainly knows the game. But I think his greatest strength was his ability as a psychologist.
What the are you doing? Stand 10 yards in the backfield. Get up on the line.
Knowing exactly when to say the right thing to motivate a player.
I'll tell you, you get in a fight and you get thrown out of this game, you're going home for good, okay? Just so you know.
Yeah, I don't know how many coaches would be able to handle the personalities in that Giants locker room. Everyone talks about LT, but Phil Simms was no easy personality either.
Hey, Phil, I'll run the game.
I don't know who you're sending in.
I'm sending goal line in,
Well, somebody give me something.
Okay.
I ain't got time to make a call.
These are all huge personalities in the 1980s, yet Parcells got the most out of these guys, and they loved playing for him.
Hey, fellas, this is what you work all off season for. This is why you lift all them weights. This is why you do all that.
He helped create one of the greatest teams of all time in the immediate aftermath of the 49ers at 84 and the Bears at 85. And the Redskins were good all the way through, too. It was a tough nut to crack in the NFC, and he cracked it.
Coming up on our countdown, final two.
You have a top 10 for Coach of the 80s. Why? You only need 2.
Hey, win with style, man.
11 division championships, 6 Super Bowls, 7 conference championships. Good night, Gracie. It's only 2. You don't need top 10. You can't even fill a top 10.
Nothing on our countdown generated more debate and outrage than the omission of the 2-time Super Bowl winner, Tom Flores.
How is Tom Flores not on the list?
I mean, it's ridiculous.
I sense an anti-Raiders agenda here.
I hate the Raiders, so anytime the Raiders don't get any recognition, I'm all about that. So leave Tom Flores the hell out of here, yeah.
I don't understand that. Why is he not on the list?
I think Tom Flores was so low-key that he sometimes gets lost. It was almost as if, well, there's Al Davis and the Raiders. Oh, and by the way, Tom Flores is coaching the team.
While Flores won 74 games, he had as many losing seasons as division titles and could never escape the shadow of Al Davis, even though he beat our next coach in Super Bowl 18.
The number 2 coach of the 80s, Joe Gibbs.
This is an example of PR winning over substance. How does he not become number 1?
Touchdown, Washington Redskins.
Won a Super Bowl with Joe Theismann. Went to his second Super Bowl with Joe Theismann. Nothing against Joe Theismann, but he's not Joe Montana.
Joe Gibbs may have topped the Casey Kasem countdown, but he's number 2 on ours. He coached all but 1 year in the 1980s and 16 seasons in all. His most impressive accomplishment? Ask anyone.
He won 3 Super Bowls.
3 Super Bowls.
3 Super Bowls with three different quarterbacks.
I am in a state of ecstasy.
Joe Gibbs is not just the best coach of that decade. Joe Gibbs is probably the greatest coach of all time, period. Because he is the one guy who was able to coach past the quarterback position.
He could win whoever the quarterback was. And he realized, I want my quarterback standing up when the game's over. His quarterbacks were guys that maybe somebody else didn't want, but the quarterback with him said, guess what? I'm not getting knocked down.
If you had a Ferrari and you put a Pinto engine in it, it's not going to do anything. So he focused on the offensive line.
Oh, my goodness, what a run.
See, everybody always said a different quarterback, but it was different running backs also.
Touchdown to Washington.
But you had the same offensive line. The transmission and the engine is the offensive and defensive line. If you get that first and solidify that on your football team, your team is going to be great.
He's got Orr wide open.
Gibbs' teams of the 1980s won 69% of their games. They won 4 division crowns, 3 conference titles, and 2 Super Bowls.
Where's Ricky Sanders?
And yet, they weren't loaded with Hall of Famers.
We had oddballs.
Not over to the fat lady sing.
We had guys that were freaks, and yet he could deal with it in a manner in which a lot of guys, their ego wouldn't have allowed them to.
Proud of all of you, man.
He really understood that the game wasn't necessarily about stars, but it was about team. I don't play my 11 best. I want to play my best 11.
How did Joe Gibbs get that much talent out of those guys? Would look at their personnel and think, how are these guys winning Super Bowls? And then on top of that, then he left and went and created a successful NASCAR team. What can't Joe Gibbs do? I have a feeling if Joe Gibbs was a businessman, he would have created Apple.
The guy was like a rock in every situation, whether he was 0-5 or whether we won a Super Bowl.
I went 0-5 with him our first 5 games. He didn't extend our practices. He didn't start cursing and hollering. Nothing changed.
Very analytical. That's how he motivated the players, through intelligence.
Let's hit it rolling now. Let's earn this thing today. Nothing gets away from us. Let's earn it today, okay?
When a coach can make people believe in what you want them to do, even if they don't want to do it, that's the sign of a great coach, and he was that guy.
Up next, we say goodbye to the 80s and hello to its greatest coach.
He's number 1. It's not even close. He is the top coach of the 80s. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Before we reveal our king of the sidelines, let's take one more trip down our path of overstuffed sweaters and undersized slacks.
Man, them are some tight pants you got on, Bubba.
Number 10.
The Houston Oilers are a dirty team.
Jerry Landon, the devil goes down to Houston.
He called it the House of Pain.
Number 9. Every Rose has his scorn for Sam Wash.
34 seconds away.
His only fault was going against Joe Montana.
Number 8.
Landry, still calm, still collected.
Tom Landry, the sharp-dressed man of Countdown.
There wasn't even a thread out of place on that guy.
Number 7.
Whatever can go wrong, will go wrong, and has gone wrong.
Marty Schottenheimer's dad, Karma Chameleon.
That guy had the worst luck.
Number 6. The Broncos' boss brings the glory days to Denver.
The Broncos have won the AFC Championship.
He's won a lot of big games.
Number 5. Don Shula still has the right stuff in Miami.
A lot of those big wins came in the 80s.
Number 4.
Mike Ditka was a hot mess.
Iron Mike Ditka, Chicago's original maniac.
That's your IQ, buddy, 0.
Number 3. The Tuna tames the youth gone wild in New York.
These are all huge personalities in the 1980s.
Number 2. Joe Gibbs. We built this city on Super Bowls.
He won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks.
And now, the number 1 coach of the 80s, Bill Walsh.
Number 1.
I would put Walsh number 1.
That's clear. There's no argument.
Yes, I think that's a no-brainer.
There was a part of the 80s that was like bright colors and Madonna and weird bracelets and like high hair. And then there was like the really stoic, like Reagan side 80s. That was Bill Walsh.
He was kind of the country club type of coach.
Now it's time for the highest of the highbrows.
The gray hair, the nice tan. He was the guy that you looked at, wearing a cardigan sweater and thinking, I wonder if what is he doing? Is he calling plays, or is he wondering whether to go with Pinot Noir or Chardonnay with his salmon steak?
Until Bill came to San Francisco, the Niners were, there was a nice road trip.
Last week, the 49ers added yet another dismal chapter to their woeful 1978 story.
When Bill Walsh takes over the 49ers, they're nothing. They're 2-14 type team.
Bill Walsh is our number 1 because he turned a perennial loser into a consistent winner through a weird science known as the West Coast offense.
When he first started that West Coast offense thing in San Francisco, there were a lot of people that scoffed at it.
So you're here, 5-step drop.
Look here, then come back to this. The key to this thing will be getting the jump on every play, beating them by 6 inches. Everything we do.
Look, starts right now. Now let's make it go, man.
Soon, the streets of San Francisco were buzzing over their A-team. The 49ers were must-see TV with a brand of more sophisticated football.
And all of a sudden, here comes Montana and Rice and Craig. And because he had it tuned so finely, you just kind of got up off the bench. I'm playing quarterback on the other team. I said, wait a minute, I'm going to watch this operation work.
Montana back to throw, steps up for the end zone, touchdown! Great throw.
He convinced those young players, if you do this, we will win. And that's exactly what happened.
We've set a high standard for this ball club, the highest in football, maybe the highest football is seen, and we're not going to deteriorate regardless of who's in the game.
Throws his pass, caught by Clark. Clark got a touchdown. Mike Clark has it. It's a touchdown for the 49ers.
During the 80s, Walsh won 100 games. He guided the 49ers to victories in Super Bowl 16 and 19.
And Craig goes in for the score.
Congratulations, boss. You got one for the other hand.
He then secured his place as the coach of the 80s with a win in Super Bowl 23.
The 49ers with 3 Super Bowl victories in the 1980s.
I didn't touch it until now. It's wonderful.
When it comes to coaches of the 80s, Bill Walsh stands alone in wins, titles, and impact. This debate is as one-sided as New Coke versus Coke Classic.
If you can put in a system that is a winning system and it lasts for a long time, you're Einstein. So I look at Bill Walsh as the Einstein of the 1980s in the National Football League. You're never going to beat Bill Walsh. It's impossible. You might as well just give up.
He's number 1. It's not even close. He is the top coach of the 80s.
Emotional moment right now with the coach down here.
forget about everybody else. Bill Walsh is number one. Have I made it clear that Bill Walsh was number one in the 80s? He is.